When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Hendon Hall. User: 18LarsNumnutZ. Posted January 23, 1997.
There are a lot of stories about the woods south of Freeman Township, but the ones my friends talk about most are about Hendon Hall, an old manor house not far from the West Freeman Cemetery. Hendon Hall was a mansion whose ownership wasn't really known, but always debated when we hung out in the back at Jimmy's Arcade. My friend Tony said it belonged to a family who made their money bootlegging in the 20s, but his girlfriend Annette swore it was built by rich Satanists who used it for their rituals. The only thing they agreed on was that it had burned down before we were born and had been rebuilt and then burned down again. The second time, no one bothered to rebuild it, and it had fallen into ruin. All these rumors made people curious, and so people would go there on Halloween or Devil's Night to drink or look for ghosts. Tony's older brother, Rick, would tell us stories about things people had experienced there, strange noises, and being chased by something you couldn't see, but could feel. I always thought it was a bunch of crap. But then in April, I turned 16, bought my car, a 1984 Volvo 244, and went there for myself. The night didn't start with us intending to go to Hendon. Me, Tony, Annette, and my girlfriend Jenny were just bombing around Freeman and the surrounding countryside and listening to Metallica's And Justice for All on repeat when we passed the gated turnaround towards Beaumont Drive. Beaumont Drive is a private road that takes you to Hendon, and it's impossible to access by car unless you have a gate key. Usually, what people do is park behind the electrical substation a half-mile down the road, then walk through the woods to the ruins. The cops don't care too much so long as you don't make it obvious that you're trespassing. It means there's less hassle and paperwork for them. Screw around and make them work, though, and they could be mean. I'd only ever been as far as the turnoff before, but Tony kept bugging me to go take a look, and the girls were game, so I agreed. We parked at the substation where the air was humming, locked the car, which will be important later, and started off into the forest. My dad had made me put a breakdown kit, including a flashlight, in the trunk, so we used that to navigate. The beam pointed at the ground so we could follow the footpath without giving ourselves away. The path led through a field, and in the distance was a small hill, on top of which was the hall. It was pitch black, and we were quiet as mice until we were away from the road so no one could see or hear us. We headed up on the path, and I remember I could see what was left of the roof of the hall and the chimney stacks looming out of the darkness, highlighted by the moon behind. The path ended at a very small stone bridge which leads over a stream, after which was the hill. I remember the bridge being covered with graffiti of pentagrams and things like, "This way to hell" and "Don't go into the house." and I'd never seen anything like that before. The girls were a little edgy at this point, but we decided to keep going. When we reached the hall, I couldn't believe how big it was. There were about 3 or 4 smaller buildings dotted around it, the remains of garages or stables or something at least. The story was that the ground underneath us was riddled with tunnels to allow the Satanists or whoever had really lived there a way of escape if the cops or whoever came. Well, the 4 of us walked up to the hall and peered through a window on the ground floor. It looked like we were looking straight into the bottom of what would have been the cellar, as the last fire had destroyed the wooden floor. Sure enough, I could see about 6 tunnel entrances, which seemed to run off in the direction of the smaller buildings. Leaning right over, I could see an entrance directly beneath me, only this one appeared to head off back in the direction of the bridge. At this point, girls were getting edgier. Jenny said she could even hear rustling in the bushes and trees around the hall, so we decided we'd seen enough and should just get the hell out of there. I mean, the Satanist graffiti on the bridge and the tunnels in the hall had creeped me out too, but I was more concerned about getting jumped by some of the noids who hung out there. There's a big difference between 16 and 18, especially when you're alone in the woods and have girls with you. Then, when we got to the car, I opened the door and the radio was on. Now that scared the daylights out of me because I know for a fact that the car was locked. I had the keys with me the whole time, and I know the radio was off when we left. I know this for sure because I wired the radio in myself so that it could only be turned on with the key in the ignition, and the ignition turned around to the first click. The next day, I checked all the wiring, the ignition, and the radio. It was all working fine. It's been a couple months since we went out there, and I still think about it. Something changed among us that night. Tony and Annette started fighting a lot and broke up maybe 2 weeks later, and Jenny just never called me back after we dropped her off. I thought being scared would be a fun thing to do together, but boy, was I wrong. Hendon Hall is still out there, but you'll never catch me within 500 yards of that place again.
Subject, gas. User, Parastud612. Posted, March 4th, 1996.
Back in '94, I was a paramedic in Bakersfield. Previously, I'd worked in LA, but if you know anything about the way things have been going there, you know LA is a pressure cooker, and emergency personnel were feeling it harder than most. I toughed it out for as long as I could, but eventually it was either leave the industry completely or go somewhere else, and since being a paramedic was and remains the only thing I've ever been good at, I decided to hit the road. Bakersfield wasn't my first, second, or even third choice. Hell, all I knew about it was what I remember from driving through it when I was a kid. But my old station chief, Kirby, had ended up there, and he heard through the grapevine I was looking to jump. He called to say he had an opening and could guarantee me full-time hours, and so in January of '94, off to Baco I went. Bakersfield has more problems now than it did then, but even then, it was no joke. The pesticide cases, the reason why I'm writing this, were by far the strangest things that ever happened that year. But they were the tip of a rough iceberg. From what happened to that poor woman in the Oaks to the graveyard murder in November. But the pesticide cases, what we were told to call the pesticide cases at least, those were on another level and will always haunt me. It started a week before in Riverside. A woman had been taken to Mercy General with bradycardia, low heart rate, and breathing difficulties. Story goes that when the docs put a breathing tube in her, they started smelling something noxious, and it got so bad everyone in the room started getting headaches, burning eyes, and nausea. It was so bad they had to evacuate the room and call in a hazmat team to decontaminate the area. According to the news, tests showed the fumes had come from common household pesticide, and the whole thing was wrapped up quick. I saw it all in the paper, and I didn't think too much more about it. A week later, maybe a month after I moved to the city, my partner Rusty and I got a call out to Seven Oaks Country Club. Seven Oaks was not exactly the LA Country Club, but it was a big deal for Bakersfield. A house on the fairway would go for $250,000 even back then. Our dispatcher, Charmaine, said the patient was a 44-year-old woman with breathing difficulties, and I'll never forget this. Something wrong with her eyes. So Rusty hit the gas, and a few minutes later, we pulled off Grand Lakes into the parking lot area for the country club, screeching to the halt under the portico out front. A manager was waiting for us and directed us into the bar, a large, round room with a domed ceiling and windows along the curved exterior wall. Next to one of the windows was a group of men who appeared to be in their 50s and 60s, dressed in full golf gear, standing around a woman of roughly the same age who was laying on her back with the rolled-up windbreakers supporting her neck and head. Her eyes were closed. Rusty asked the men to give us room to work and started talking to one of the men, the woman's husband, who had stepped forward as we approached. I crouched down next to the woman, Mary, I heard him call her, and checked her vitals. Low pulse, shallow breathing, pale skin. Not great, but not unusual. Then I pulled out my pocket light and gently opened her left eye to test for pupillary response, and that's when it started. Her eyes were black, not dilated black, as in no pupils, no sclera, just darkness. I shook off my confusion and attempted to shine my light into the eye anyways, and took everything I had not to scream when something passed across the eye from right to left. It happened in an instant, but I could see it was brown and slim, wriggling like a tadpole. We loaded Mary in and headed toward Kern Hospital. The whispering started before we'd even cleared Seven Oaks' big circular drive. At first, I thought it was Rusty, but he was driving and I was in back, so between the engine and the siren, it didn't seem likely. Then he called back to me, telling me to stop whispering and just tell him what I needed. I shouted back that I hadn't said anything, but I'd heard the whispering too. He didn't speak again until about 10 minutes later when he asked me to come up front. We were on Truxton, just about to pass under the highway, and I asked him why he was driving so slowly. We should have been almost all the way to Kern by now, not halfway there. He replied that he'd had the hammer down the whole time, but something was not right. He said that this was the second time we'd passed under that overpass, that the first time it happened, he'd felt this wave of nausea and looked away from the road. When he looked back, we were back the way we came, coming up on it again. What do you say to that? I told Rusty to just get us there because Mary wasn't looking good. Her pulse continued to fall, and even with oxygen, her breathing wasn't improving. As for her eyes, I couldn't bring myself to check them again. Once we got to Kern, we discharged her to the attending physician in the ER, did our paperwork as quick as possible, and got the hell out of there. We were on our way to a car wreck on the highway when word came over the radio. Kern was being evacuated and their ER quarantined. More pesticide poisoning, they said, but Rusty, me, and everyone who attended to those poor women knew the truth. Well, maybe not the truth, but I don't know of any pesticide that can explain what we experienced that day.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.